For my first build lecture, I decided to do my PowerPoint on Chapter 2, the chemistry of biology, just so we can go over the ground concepts of biology. So first we'll talk about elements and atoms. And as we know with the element, there's all kinds on the periodic table. They range from iron to hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, potassium. So an element is a chemical substance that cannot be broken down. It is composed of atoms, and with each element, the number of electrons and neutrons are different. They're not all the same. And hydrogen is actually the most common element you will see. So atoms, they are the basic building block of chemistry. Everything you can touch, see, is made up of thousands of tiny atoms, of which you cannot see obviously by the naked eye, but they're there. An atom contains a nucleus, protons, and neutrons. The number of protons that that atom contains will determine that specific atom's atomic number, and the number of protons and neutrons that an atom contains will determine that specific atom's atomic mass. So next we'll kind of go in on the differences and similarities of electrons and protons. So electrons actually have a negative charge to where protons contain a positive charge. Electrons have less mass than protons. An electron is actually present in the space around the nucleus where they actually orbit the nucleus, as to where protons are present inside of the nucleus. And like we stated before, this will contribute to the mass of that nucleus. Um, when it comes to protons and electrons, both are actually an equal number in the atoms. So, for instance, if you have 3 protons in an atom, you have to have 3 electrons. And like I said, these are both components of an atom. They help make up an atom. Next, we'll talk about different chemical bonds. There are several. They all form in different ways. So, an ionic bond is a bond that actually forms between oppositely charged ions. So you have to have a positive and a negative, or polar and a nonpolar, for this to form. Covalent bonds, this forms when electrons are shared between two atoms. So if this electron has a certain number of, if this atom has a certain number of electrons, can actually share with another atom that may have less, and that forming a covalent bond between the two. Hydrogen bonds, they actually form between hydrogen and electronegative atoms like nitrogen, oxygen. And then last we have these van der Waals bonds, which actually form when weak electrostatic forces attract neutral molecules. We'll go in a little bit about the solutes and solvents. Both can actually be a liquid, a solid, or a gas. A solute actually dissolves in a solvent, and after that solvent dissolves the solute, it results in a solution. Solids are actually more soluble at higher temperatures. Some examples would be, say, your solvent is coffee, and you decide you're going to put a sugar cube in your coffee. Well, that sugar cube is an example of a solute. And what that coffee does is it dissolves the sugar, giving your coffee a sweeter taste. So the end is your solution. That coffee with that dissolved sugar will be your solution, a sweeter coffee. Next, we'll talk about the pH scale. So this scale is used to determine how acidic or basic a substance is, and I have kind of a table in the background here. So 0 to 6 is the most acidic. So as you can see in the background, 0 being like a battery, the acid, it's very acidic. And then you'll move up to the 2 and you have a lemon. A tomato's a 4. And milk, you wouldn't think, but milk is a 6. And then right down here, you can see stomach acid, vinegar, all that's acidic. We know that. 7 is considered neutral, and we know water is neutral. It has no pH. It's not acidic. It's not basic. It is just neutral. And then you have 8 through 14, which is considered basic or alkaline. And we can see here, blood is at an 8, stomach tablets at a 10, soap 12, drain cleaner at a 14, and then we have baking soda, ammonia. So those are considered more basic or alkaline. Next, we'll talk about some biochemicals. So carbohydrates, um, these serve as key nutrients and primary energy sources. And then we have lipids, which are structural components of membranes, and these include our fats, waxes, and phospholipids. Proteins, which transport molecules and help in DNA replication. And then nucleic acid, which carry genetic information and make up the RNA. So next we'll kind of go into components of biochemicals. Some of these may be known, some of these may not. So with carbohydrates, you have anything in those sorry, categories of glucose, fructose, maltose, lactose, sucrose, cellulose, and then, starch and glycogen. Lipids, these are particularly, like we stated before, are fats and oils. Some membrane components, glycolic acid, cholesterol, ergosterol. And then proteins, this is where our enzymes come in and part of the cell membrane, cell wall, ribosomes, and antibodies. The nucleic acid is where chromosomes, mRNA, tRNA, small RNA, and genetic material for viruses come in. So these are all your components of biochemicals. Next, we have our levels of protein structure. So there's 4 levels. At the primary level, obviously this is your simplest level. Um, it's a sequence of amino acids in a polypeptide chain. With your secondary level, this is your local structure of the protein backbone. And folding of a polypeptide chain happens here. Tertiary, this is a three-dimensional structure of a polypeptide chain in space. The quaternary, 2 or more peptide chains forming subunits. Subunits can be different or identical. So those are your structures of your protein levels, primary being the simplest, quaternary being the more complex. Okay, we have 3 components of nucleotides. This is a nitrogenous base, which is a molecule that contains nitrogen and has the chemical properties of a base. Next, you have those pentose sugars, which is a monosaccharide with 5 carbon atoms. And next we have phosphate. These compose of a nitrogen base and cyclic pentose and 1 or more phosphate groups. So next we'll talk a little bit about DNA and RNA. So we've heard of DNA and RNA, and we know that DNA is what gives us our genetics. And DNA will carry on from generation to generation. So your grandparents, their grandparents, and so on have all carried these DNA cells down to you, and you will pass them on to your children. So DNA actually only makes up 1% of a cell, which is kind of crazy to think because of how much DNA plays a role in us. These are actually stored inside the nucleus. And we know that DNA has that double helix shape. And it contains 4 nitrogenous bases. So next we'll talk about RNA. And RNA is what codes, decodes, and regulates genes. This sends the codes to say, hey, they're going to have blue eyes. This is what sends all the codes to the cells in the structure, which RNA makes up 5% of a cell, which is bigger than DNA, maybe it plays a bigger role. RNA is different when it comes to the shape. We know that DNA, like we said, has that double helix shape, but RNA is actually single-stranded. Ribose sugars are actually attached to nitrogenous bases when it comes to RNA. So DNA, RNA, big role in our genetic makeup. Next and last, we'll talk about the 3 components of ATP. You can see this little diagram at the bottom kind of breaks it down so you can actually see ATP, which we know is energy used in cells. It actually has 3 components. It has that nitrogenous base, which is over here in the example, adenine. And then those come down to this big old ribose sugar right here in the middle. And coming out from that, you can see 1, 2, 3. They have 3 serially bonded phosphate groups. And that makes up ATP, which, like we stated, was energy for the cells.